In this video, we're going to create the Lioness model that you can see on the screen. The starting point for this will be a piece of 2D clip art from the vectorart.com website that they've kindly allowed us to use for this example. We'll begin by importing the EPS file and showing you how to edit the vectors to create the different shapes that we're going to need to model the part. Then we're going to open a file where the editing has already been completed and use those vectors to create all the different shapes we need to build our basic components. And then we're going to make edits to these and then use the smoothing and sculpting tools in the software in order to finish them off. In the companion tutorial to this, we'll look at creating the toolpaths to cut the part out. We'll begin now by opening a new copy of the software. I'm going to start by creating a new file, and I'm going to set the job size to be 12 inches wide by 8 inches high. Material Z is going to be the top of the block. Thickness I'm going to leave set to 0.75 inches. I'm going to work with the XY datum in the lower left corner in this case. I'm going to work in inches. Modeling resolution I'm going to set to high. And for the appearance for this, because I'm going to do a lot of sculpting, I would actually like to work with a solid colour rather than a material that has a grain in it. It's much easier to see what's happening with the shapes that you're sculpting when you've just got a single colour for your components. So I'm going to click on the drop down arrow here. I'm going to push the scroll bar to the very top and choose the solid colour option, and then from this drop down from the palette here I'm going to choose the blue, and this is called light blue. It's the middle one out of the 5 blues there. I'm going to select that, I'm going to hit OK, and now when we create our 3D shapes, that will be the colour of the components. Next, I'm going to import some vectors. So I'm going to come up and click on Import Vectors from a file. I'm going to choose an EPS file, and this is from the vectorart.com website, and this is called vectorartlioness.eps. It's in the project folder for this example, and I'm going to go ahead and hit open. Now we can see that's been imported in its original size and position. The first thing I want to do is center that in the middle of my job, and then I'm going to scale it up. So with the vectors selected, as they will be once you've imported it, I'm going to click on Align Selected Objects, click on the option to align that horizontally and vertically in the middle of my material, hit close. And then I'm going to click on the icon here to set selected object size. I'm going to make sure link XY is checked, the anchor set to the middle here, and I'm going to enter a width of 11. I'm going to let the height scale automatically. I can hit apply and close. Now what I'd like to do is use these vectors in order to create the shapes that I need to make a model of the Lioness. At the moment though, these vectors have been set up for doing either say V-carving or for cutting out 2D shapes, and so we're going to need to do some editing on them in order to divide them up into the pieces we need so we can create all the components we want. I'm going to start by showing you some of the basic techniques we'd use for editing this, and then to shortcut the process we'll actually import a file that's been completely edited. Let's start here though by taking all the vectors that show the detail on the top of our Lioness. So I'm just going to hold the Shift key down and click individually each of these vectors on the inside of the main external shape. Then I'm going to right mouse click with all those selected and choose the option to move to layer, new layer, and we'll call that layer detail. I'm going to make it not visible and not active, so uncheck both these boxes and hit OK. So we're just left with the outline. We're going to divide this vector up so that we've got a separate closed region for each of the components that I want to create. In this case that'll be one for the tail, one for the back leg, one for the body, one for the front leg, and one for the head. I'm going to do this using the node editing tools. If we select our outline, I can come over and click on this icon here, or I could hit the N key on the keyboard, and by doing that I get to see the individual constituent pieces of my vector. Now I can hover over any of these nodes. You'll see that the cursor changes so that I've got the crosshair there, and now I could right mouse click and choose to cut the vector at that point, and you'll see the letter C is also displayed there, which shows me the shortcut key for that command. If I click on that, what it's done is it's cut that vector at that particular position, and I can see that because the green node is showing me that that's now the start point. If I want to come along the vector here, I'm going to go over this node here at the start of the leg, at the end of the body and the start of the leg, and I could right mouse click and choose the option to cut the vector there as well, and now we're just left with this as a separate vector. Now, still in node editing mode, I'm going to click back on the main vector we've got here. Now I want to cut it where the top of the leg here meets the neck. Now again, we could right mouse click and use the option there, or I can just hover the cursor over and hit C on the keyboard in order to cut it. You can see again that's divided up the part. Now if I do select here, I'm going to hit C on the keyboard here to cut the vector there, come along the body, and now I want to cut the vector but not where there's a node, but that's not a problem. I can just hover the cursor over the span and hit C there, and I'm going to hit C there. And now if I hit escape on the keyboard, we can go back into regular selection mode, and you can see I've got a separate open vector for each part of my outline. Now to close these off, what I can do is select any one of these vectors, and I can choose the option here to join or close the vectors with a smooth curve. So if we click on that, I can work my way around, clicking on each one. I can select these two vectors here in this case because I've got the top and the bottom of the body, and select that, and then click it again in order to close it. And I select the leg here, click on the same option, then the head, and again just click on the same option there. Now in order to model these, I really need them to have quite a large overlap so that I'm going to get a smooth flowing shape between each of the regions. So now what I'd want to do is take any of these vectors, select it, go back into node editing. In this case I'll hit N on the keyboard to do that, and then I want to add an extra node here, so I can either right mouse click and choose the option to insert a point, or you could see I could use the I on the keyboard. I'm going to say insert a point. I'm just going to drag that up in order to get more of an overlap. I can do the same with the tail here. I can hit I to insert a point there. I can drag this out. I can adjust the handles in order to make sure that I'm going to get a nice overlap between each of these shapes that I'm creating. Same with the neck here. Could hit I to insert a point, could drag that along, hit I to insert another point, drag that along there, adjust the handles in order to create the shape that I want to have when I come to start modelling these parts. This vector editing stage could take a few minutes or much longer than that depending on the complexity of the part you're working on. I will just continue with the same process using the node editing tools to cut the vectors, to join them, and then to manually edit them until I had all the shapes that I wanted. That would include this set of vectors for the main shapes and also those that we've got on the detail layer as well. In this case, rather than watch me go through that process, we're going to jump ahead and load a file where the vector editing has already been done. But as I say, this would have been done using exactly the techniques that I've already shown you here. So I'm going to come down to the drawing tab, I'm going to click on open, and from the project folder here I'm going to open the Aspire file Lioness-vectors and hit the open button and say I don't want to save what I was working on. Now you can see as that's opened we've got a very similar set of vectors to what we had before, but we've just completed all the editing we wanted to do, and in addition to that we've also worked on putting these vectors onto specific layers. So now we've got a layer that represents the vectors for the tail, back leg, body, front leg and head, and that was just done as I went through and did the editing process. We're ready now to start our modelling process. I'm going to work through the vectors on one layer at a time in order to create all the components we need. I'm going to come back to the Layers tab here. I'm going to come up to the top. I'm just going to undraw all the layers by clicking the light bulb at the top of the list. I'm going to select the light bulb for the tail layer to switch it on, and then actually select that layer so that it's active. Now I'm going to come to the Modelling tab. I'm going to click on the icon to tile the windows so that we've got the 2D view on the left, the 3D view on the right here. For this example, all our components are going to be created using the Create Shape function, which is the first icon here under the modelling tools. So let's click on that. I'm going to select the vector that I'd like to apply the profile to. I'm going to use the first option, which is the curved profile, and I'm going to enter quite a high angle for this. I'm going to push the slider up to around 80 degrees. That's going to give me a shape that's got a very hard edge because of the angle, but is a little bit too bulbous. I'm going to control that by using the option to scale to exact height and enter a value of 0.2 and hit the spacebar to apply that. I think this profile gives you a good balance of getting a nice hard visual edge on your components, but also giving you the right amount of curvature, particularly when you're working on something organic like an animal. Once I'm happy with that shape, I'm going to click on the combine mode and set this to merge because I want to make sure this will merge into the back part of the Lioness. I'm going to change the name to tail, and then I'm just going to hit apply and close, and we can see now that component's been added to the component tree there. I'm just going to click in the 2D view to deselect that vector, come down to the layers tab. I'm going to switch off the tail layer, going to switch on the back leg layer and select that so that it becomes my current active layer, and then come back to the modeling tab. So let's come back up and click on the create shape icon. I'm going to select my outer vector this time, and we'll go with exactly the same parameters that we had before. I'm going to set this to merge, and I'm going to choose name back leg and hit apply. Let's just go back to the standard ISO view there. So I'm happy with the way that looks. I'm going to click on the button to start new component, and now I'm going to click this vector and shift and select this vector. So I'm selecting the two inner vectors there using the shift key so that they both form part of my selection. And this time I'm going to use the same angle, but I'm going to change the scale for this to be 0.15, and I'm going to set this name to be back leg detail. If we hit apply, we'll see that we don't actually see that shown in the 3D view, even though we can see the preview of it in the 2D, and that's because we've got it set to merge, so it's currently merging in under the leg here. So I'm actually going to change the combine mode for that to add, and now we can see it's adding on to our back leg, which is the effect we'd like that to have between those two components. We have another issue that we'll have to deal with in a minute in terms of how this is combining with the tail component, but we'll deal with that using the components and the component tree. So if I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit close. I'm just going to click to deselect those in the 2D view. So if we take a look at our current component tree, we can see we've got our tail, the back leg is merging in with that, but then the back leg detail is adding on to both of those. What we want is for the back leg detail to just add on to the back leg, and then for that to be merged with the tail. The best way to deal with that is to group these two components together so they act as a single component. So we can take the back leg and then shift and select the back leg detail component. I can come up and click on the icon here to group selected objects. The software will now group those together. I've still got two separate components. If I click on the little plus mark there, we can see those listed underneath, but now they're acting as a single component, and this is currently set to merge, so that's merging in with the tail component, and we can see that looks good in the 3D view there. Let's continue this process now to create all the other shapes for our Lioness. I'm going to click on the layers tab again. I'm going to undraw the back leg layer, switch on the body layer. I'm going to select that so that it's the active layer, come back down to the modeling tab. I'm going to select the 2D view here, then click on the icon to zoom to fit. Now we're going to click back on the create shape from vectors icon. We'll select the main body shape here. I'm going to use the same angle. I'm going to change the scale to exact height to 0.2. I'm going to set it to merge. We'll call that component body. Hit apply, then click on the start new component button. Select the other vector here for the body detail. I'm going to change that to scale to a height of 0.15. Set the combine mode for that to add. Call that body detail. Hit apply and close, and once again we want to make sure that these two components are effectively acting as one. So I'm just going to click to deselect the vectors in there. I'm then going to select just the body and hold shift down and select the body detail component. Click on the icon to group those selected objects together. Once again we've got those two components in a group now that are acting as a single component that are merging with everything else we've created. Now we can come back down to the layers tab, can undraw the body layer. I'm going to switch on the front leg layer and select that so that it becomes the active layer. Let's click back on the modeling tab here. So let's come up and click on the create shape icon again. I'm going to select the outer vector for our leg. We can zoom in there if we want to see that a little more clearly. Going to set the scale to height to be 0.2 inches. Going to hit the merge option there, and I'm going to call that front leg. Hit apply in order to calculate that shape. Then we'll click on the button to start new component. I'm going to select the internal vectors, use the same angle, but this time I'm going to set the scale to height to be just 0.1, set that to add, and then we'll call that front leg detail. Hit apply, hit close. Now I'm going to click to deselect all the vectors in the white space there. I'm going to select the front leg component, shift and select the front leg detail component, choose the icon to group the selected objects together. In a moment we're going to come back and edit some of these components in order to change the way that they relate to the components around them. For now though, I'm just going to finish calculating all the shapes that I need for this particular example. So let's go ahead and come down to the layers tab again, switch off the front leg layer, switch on the head layer, select that so that it's active, click on the modeling tab, going to come up and click on create shape again, select the outer vector, change the scale to height for this to be 0.2, set it to merge, change the name to be head and hit apply. Then I'm going to click on start new component, select the vector on the inside here, and I'm going to change the scale to height to this to be 0.12 and set it to add and call that head detail, hit apply. You can see there, if we look at that, that's actually quite thick, so we might even tone that down to 0.1 and hit apply, and then go ahead and hit close there. Once more, we could take those two components, make sure actually first to click in the 2D view to deselect all the vectors. I'm going to select the two components. I'm going to click on the icon to group the selected objects together. Let's go ahead and just fit the 2D view. We'll also click to fit the 3D view there and go back to the ISO. At this point, if we wanted to, we could click on the layers tab and we could just click the light bulb at the top there twice in order to switch all our layers back on again. I'm going to come back to the modeling tab, and if we just maximize the 3D view and take a look at this, that's not looking too bad. We're almost ready to start sculpting, but what I would like to do is raise up the back leg and the front leg so that we get more of the shoulder and the main part of the leg here overlapping into the body. Let's come first and select the back leg. I'm going to come up and click on the icon so we can tile the two windows, and what I'd like to do here is come up and click on the wrench to change the properties of this particular group of components. I'm going to click on the option to tilt, so I'm going to check that, and then I'm going to click the button to set anchor. The first point I set is going to remain on the modeling plane. The second point I set will be tilted up by whatever angle we specify here. So I'm going to come in and just put in an angle of 1 degree at this point, and you can see that's just tilted that up and made it a little more prominent before we go ahead and start the sculpting. Next, I'm going to come down and I'm going to choose the front leg group, and we're going to change the component properties for that. Again, I'm going to click on the option to tilt, click the button to set anchor, click down by the toes of the front leg to leave that area on the modeling plane, and then click up the top here to create my second point, and then tilt the angle up for that. Let's try around 1 degree. We'll go a little higher than that. Let's go around 1.8 in this case, and we can see that's going to give us the component more prominent with the others that it's overlapping with. Let's just zoom in to make that a bit clearer. If we want, we could uncheck that so we can see the difference between having the tilt on there and not having the tilt on there. Let's just deselect now, hit close on the component properties. Once I'm happy with the way the model looks here, we're ready to start the sculpting, which is going to allow us to smooth and blend all these hard edges together to give us a more natural look. At this point, we're getting close to the stage that we're ready to smooth and sculpt our model. I would like to make 2 more edits though before we start doing that. First is to tilt the back legs up a little bit so that as they overlap into the body here it's a little bit more prominent, and then we're going to do the same thing with the front legs. So I can see where all the components are. I'm going to come down, click on the Layers tab, I'm going to right mouse click over the layers and just choose the option to show and show all, so we've got all the layers switched on. Next we'll come back down to the modelling tab. I want to select the back leg group. I'm going to click on the wrench icon to change the properties, and we're going to choose the option to tilt this up. Next thing we do when we tilt it is to click on the set anchor button, and then the software will require us to click 2 points in the 2D view. The first point is the point that will stay on the modelling plane, and the second point is the point that will be tilted up as we increase the angle here. So if I click on this, just increase the angle there, we go up to 1.2 degrees, you can see how that's become more prominent with the other shapes around it. If I go down to 0.8, we can see that starts to lower down and blend in a bit more. I think I'm happy with how that looks at 0.8 degrees. Next I'm going to come down and click on the front leg group. I'm going to choose the option to tilt, click on the set anchor button, I'm going to click down around the toes to keep that on the modelling plane, and click up just past the shoulder in order for that to be the point that I'm going to tilt up when we choose an angle here. If we increase the angle there, we can see in the 3D view how that's been affected. We might want to zoom in there so you can see that a little bit more clearly in this case. If I was to switch off the tilt, you can see how that goes back to how it was before. Then we can switch on the tilt again. In this case I'm just going to set this to be around 1.4 degrees, so we're just making that shoulder a little bit more prominent. That'll be helpful when we come to actually do our sculpting and smoothing. Now I'm going to hit close on the component properties there and deselect that component. I'll go back to the ISO view in the 3D view here. Now we're ready to start smoothing and sculpting the different components in the job. If we want to, at any stage we could take an individual component like the tail and we could go into the sculpting and work on that. As soon as we want to sculpt more than 2 components though, so for instance a group or multiple components and groups, then we're going to need to bake those components together so that they become a single object. That's the only way that we can start to blur and smooth the edges between the different shapes. Once we bake something though, that is an irreversible process, and so if we want to, we need to make sure that we make a safe copy of any components before we actually get to the stage where they're baked together. So to do this, I'm going to select the top component in the list, hold shift down and click on the bottom component so that they all become selected. Then I'm going to click on the icon to group those together to make a single group of components. I'm going to right mouse click over the name, choose the rename option, and we'll call this Lioness Original, and then just click in the list in order to accept that. Then I'm going to click to select that, right mouse click again, and from the menu I'm going to select the option to duplicate. That'll create a second copy of that group of components. I'm going to click on the check mark to undraw the first copy, then I'm going to right mouse click on the second one, choose the rename option again and go to Lioness Edit, and then we'll just change the name of that so we can differentiate between the two. So now we should just have the second one with a check mark in it to show that it's drawn, and this first one will remain as a safe copy if we ended up needing to go back and get to the individual components again. Before we start the process of sculpting individual areas of the model, then it's a good idea to do a general smoothing over the whole job. So here I'm going to come down and select this new group of components that we created. I'm going to come up and click on the icon to apply a smoothing filter to selected components, which is this icon here. I'm going to click on that, and the software is going to warn me that this is a function that requires those components to be baked together so they're a single component, no longer a group of individual parts. I'm happy with that because I've already made a safe copy of this, so I'm just going to hit OK. We can see that the smoothing function has opened. I'm going to maximize the 3D view. I'm going to look down the Z-axis so we can see the effect of this, and you can see we have this slider bar here which determines how much smoothing we want to do on the part. We can also determine whether we want to preserve transparency or not. What this does is tell the software whether we're happy for the edge to smooth into the background or not. by having that checked, we're saying that we want to preserve the edge of the part here and not have that smooth, and only smooth the internal shapes. So I'm going to leave that option checked. Let's just take the slider and slide it up round about halfway here, and you can see that started to smooth together the shapes inside of the model. May have gone a little too far there. I want to leave some of the details, so I'm going to back that off maybe to around a third of the way along there. When I'm happy with the way that looks, we've just started to smooth these shapes together, then I can go ahead and hit OK. Next, we're going to use the smoothing tools to make our final adjustments to the model. I'm going to start by zooming in on the tail area of our lioness in this case, and with that selected, I'm going to click on the icon here to go into the sculpting. Now within here, I'm going to start by just adding a little shape into the tail. So I'm going to click on the smudge icon. This allows us to drag the material along either from low areas into high areas or high areas into low areas. I'm going to set the diameter to be fairly small in this case. Let's go down to around about 15, the strength to be around about 30, leave the smoothness around 70. I'm going to make sure preserve transparency is on. Again, I don't want to harm the edge of my model, and then I'm going to click just outside of the model. You can see when I click the cursor goes red, and then I'm going to drag that in, and I'm just going to keep repeating that process. You can see we're starting to create a shape by doing that. If you want to have more of an effect on this, then we can increase the strength or the diameter in order to add more shape into there, and then it's just a case of either dragging into the high areas from the low in order to lower it, or from the high into the low if you want to drag that down. So we're just dragging the material around to start to add some shape into the tail there. Next, I'm going to come down and start to smooth some of the join lines we've got in here. In order to pan the job while we're in the sculpting, the easiest thing to do is to click on the Twiddle option here that stops me sculpting and allows me to use my view control functions like holding the left and the right mouse key down simultaneously so I can pan the job around. Some of those functions are available without going into the Twiddle, but this is the safest way to do it to make sure you don't accidentally sculpt anything while you're moving or rotating the part around. Now I'm going to come back to smooth here. I'm going to set the strength to be around 50, and we'll work with the diameter around about 60 in this case. Doesn't need to be exact. I'm just going to click over these areas here, and I'm going to rub back and forward. So it's a little like using sandpaper in a way, sort of virtual sandpaper, and you can see how I can start to smooth out some of these creases. Just go along the back there. Just going to smooth inside the part here. If you feel like you're smoothing it too much, you can always reduce the strength down, and I can come into the back of the leg here and we'll just smooth that out. And all we're trying to do is create a more natural blend between our shapes. When we use the software to create the shapes, we tend to get fairly hard edges, and they wouldn't be how the part would actually look on a real animal. So here we're just smoothing out these seams. As I hold the mouse down and move it back and forward, then that will smooth the object more and more the more times that I go over it. Let's just go back up over here. Again, we'll come up to the Twiddle, and this time I'm going to right mouse click in the view just to zoom out a little. Then I'm going to hold both mouse keys down in order to pan that up a bit more. Now we're going to check the bottom part of the leg here, so I'm just going to pan over and zoom in down the bottom. I'm going to come back up to the smudge tool. I'm going to change the diameter down so that we've got something that's appropriate for the toes of the lioness here. So I'm going to go around about 30, and strength I'm going to set to about 40 there. And these strengths and sizes are something that you constantly adjust. So here you can see I'm just dragging those toes down to the base of the model. If we found we were having too much or too little effect, then you'd keep coming and tweaking the different values that you've got inside the sculpting function. We can operate some of the functions in the sculpting by using the keyboard. For instance, while I'm sculpting in the 3D view here, if I want to adjust the diameter or the strength, I can use the cursor arrows on the keyboard. If I use the up and down arrow, then you can see that's going to increase the strength if I go up, or decrease the strength if I hit the down key. and then the left and the right key will let me increase the diameter, and the left arrow will let me decrease the diameter. So I can adjust those from the keyboard. I can also move around the different functions by using the number that you see assigned to each of these. So at the moment I'm set to smudge, but if I wanted to change to smooth, then I could hit 1 on the keyboard, and you can see that's changed to the smooth function. For deposit I've got 3, remove material 4, undo 5, and the twiddle I can go onto by hitting 6 on the keyboard. So I don't need to keep moving the cursor back and forward in order to choose different functions. Now we're back in the twiddle mode. I'm going to just pan this down, pan it over. I'm going to zoom out a little so we can see the front end of the Lioness here. So let's come back and choose the smoothing function again. So I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard in order to change to that. And I'm going to increase the diameter by hitting the right mouse arrow here. So there you can see me editing that without moving the cursor over. I'm going to come up and just start to smooth these areas in here, just to blend those together. The bottom of the body there, and in the top of the shoulder, around the top here. Just blending these shapes out so that we get a smoother transition between the neck and the shoulder there. We come down into here. If we want, we can also make quite large changes. If we went to the smudge tool here and I increase the diameter significantly and reduce the strength down, that's a little too much. There we're going to go with something around about 150 say, and I can just drag quite large areas of the model in order to get them to come further over. So you can see I'm just clicking and dragging. Each time the cursor turns red, that's showing me that the mouse is being pressed down, and we can just move those back and forward in order to drag and average out the shapes that we've got. If I want, we could reduce the diameter down, increase the strength, and bring more curvature into the top of the shoulder there. You can see that the sculpting is a very iterative process, and it takes a reasonable amount of practice to start to get proficient with it. It really is just a case that you need to work with it, use it, try different things and see what effects they have. Here, if I want me to smooth out the body a little more, get more transition there. So I'm happy with the way that looks, and we can go ahead and move on to the head and the front leg. So we'll go back to the twiddle tool, and I'm going to hit 6 on the keyboard, hit the left and right mouse key to pan over and zoom in here. So let's just come down to the bottom of the paw. I'm going to choose the smudge option. I'm going to reduce the diameter down to around about 20, maybe a little higher. Let's go to about 30. Just again, just adjust the toes here. If we wanted to, we could also reduce that down, increase the strength, and actually come off from the edge of the model and increase the definition between them as well. You can see I'm just dragging from the low area into the high area there in order to increase the shape we've got there. Now we can come back, increase that again, and then just drag the different areas here. Now I'm using the mouse to do my sculpting here, but if you're really looking to get serious about sculpting, then it might be worth investing in a tablet like the Wacom products, and that would allow you to use a pen rather than the mouse to control your sculpting, which for a lot of people can be a bit easier to master. Now with the head, I'm still using the smudge tool here, and probably with the diameter around 25, strength around 50 there. I'm just going to start dragging material down in order to emphasize the nose area. I'm going to make the diameter a little bit bigger. There. And we'll do the same with the chin too, down the bottom here. So I'm just going to drag material down in order to better define the mouth. And you can hear maybe the mouse clicking quite a lot. You'll tend to find that you'll sort of click on and off a reasonable amount as you sort of looking to drag from this area down, and then I let go, click back up here and drag down again. So you can see there's a lot of work with the mouse for clicking it on and off in order to determine the areas that you're actually looking to sculpt. I'm going to just even out the shape in the middle of the face there. Do the same here in the cheek, just going back and forward down the bottom here, the bottom part of the face. Just blending these shapes together until I'm happy with the way that looks. Next, on the eye, I'm going to just drag the brow out a little more and strengthen that up. And then I'd actually like to draw the eye in this case. So I'm going to go to deposit. I'm going to set it to be fairly small. I'm going to go with sort of a medium strength. And then I'm just going to go back and forward in that area in order to deposit material. If we want to with that, we could then come back in and just smooth that out. So there we've added the eye. And now for the ear, I'm going to use the remove option. And I'm going to set this fairly low to start with. If you're not sure how much material you want to take off, it's normally good to start with lower strengths and then work up. And I'm just going to go into here, and I can see that's actually kind of reasonable there. So I'm just going to dig out some of the material around the ear and then use the smudge tool in order to join together the edges and drag that down into the head there. If you do find that you've made a mistake in an area, then you can always come back. So there, if I find I've dug in too much in the back of the neck there, I could come in and click on the undo brush, and that allows me to just carefully go back and undo an area, still using the brush. So I'm not undoing everything I've just done, I'm not discarding it, but I'm able to just undo a small area, and now I could come back in, maybe I'll reduce the strength and get a little more control over what I'm doing with that shape. So you can see with the sculpting, you could keep working on it and working on it. Basically, you just keep doing it until you're happy with the way it looks. Let's just blend in the neck into the head there. But you can see how powerful it is and how much we're able to change the way the model looks by using these functions. So let's click down the Z view again, take a look at our model. I'm happy with the way that looks. I could keep sculpting if I wanted, but I'm pretty happy with what we've got to there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit keep and hit OK. And now we can see the finished part there. And if we wanted to, we could see how different that looks from the original set of components. If I was to switch that off and switch on the original set, you can see that's what we started with before we went into smoothing and sculpting, and this is what we've finished with here. So we're able to create much more natural looking shapes by using the sculpting tools to blend together the shapes we've created with the modeling tools. Things like the smoothing and the sculpting can be undone if we do that straight away after we've completed them. So in this case, if I went to edit and undo sculpting, then that's going to go back to the stage we were at after we'd done the smoothing. If I go to edit, undo smooth, then we'd actually go back to the stage where we had our individual components in the group here before we went into the smoothing. If I come up to edit and redo smooth, edit, redo sculpting, you can see it's possible for us to step back and forward a few steps, but each of those is going to completely undo or redo all the changes we made while we were using that specific function. At this point, let's save our file. I'm going to go up to File, Save As, and we'll call this Lioness model.crv3d. Save it in the project folder. So you can open that if you wanted to take a look at the file in the state it's in after my sculpting. And in the companion tutorial to this, we'll actually go on with this model and create toolpaths in order to machine it. Let's take a moment to summarize what we've looked at in this example. We started with a vector file from the Vector Art website, piece of clip art. We imported that into our job, sized it, and then showed you how we can use things like the node editing tools in the software to manipulate the vectors, start to break them up and create the individual vector outlines we need to model our 3D components. We then opened a file where we'd done all the vector editing we needed and used the Create Shape tool in order to generate rounded components for the different parts of the Lioness. For areas like the leg, the body and the head, we actually created multiple components and then grouped those together so we could have an underlying shape with a detailed shape sitting on top of it. Once we'd created all of our shapes, we used the Tilt tool in order to raise up the front leg and the back leg component groups so that they were more prominent. After that, we were ready to start thinking about smoothing and sculpting, and because we knew those functions would require us to bake the components together into a single object, we started by grouping together all the components that we'd already created and made a duplicate copy. That allowed us to make sure that we'd have a safe version of all of our individual components if we wanted to go back to them. We then took the copy, went into the smoothing tool, that baked everything together as a single object and allowed us to do some simple smoothing between the different areas of the job. Then to finish, we went into the sculpting tool and were able to go into all the individual places in the part, smooth, smudge, add and remove material until we were happy with how the job looked. At that point we'd be ready to create toolpaths on it, and that will be dealt with in a separate tutorial. And that concludes this example.